Thanks, first of all, for having me here. I have to admit, as a Democrat, that many of my friends and supporters looked at me as if I was absolutely nuts when I suggested that I would be coming tonight to speak with a group that's often identified with the Tea Party. There are some, especially in my party, who think that the Tea Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party. But there are many others who believe that the Tea Party is motivated by real concerns about the direction of our government and the responsiveness of our government to citizens, and above all, a frustration with business as usual.
So guys, what you just saw there was Pete Buttigieg praising the Tea Party movement for its analysis about the direction of America and how they have a lot to offer to Republicans and Democrats. This is a really troubling clip because it shows just how little we know about Pete Buttigieg and what he sees as the proper direction for America. This man, a few months ago, was known really only as a mayor of a mid-sized town in the Midwest. He had no national or even regional profile to speak of. And because he's trending upwards in Iowa especially, there's a chance that he could be competing to win the actual Democratic nomination. Certainly, he's moving upwards in that contest, especially as Joe Biden, I feel, is trending downwards. So we need to know more about this man. And the reality is that when he's praising the Tea Party, even back in 2010, we all knew what it was really about. We all knew. The Tea Party was a combination on the one hand of capitalist elites, some of the very richest and most powerful Americans, trying to attack the government so that they could enrich themselves through lower regulations, weaker unions, and in general, any kind of barrier to their prosperity would be torn down. And on the other, a force of reaction against the election of a black president. That's what this was really about. A combination of some of the richest and most powerful people on the one hand, and some white nationalists on the other. Sometimes they were the same groups. Sometimes they were a sort of, uneasy alliance of forces. And that was the Tea Party. The Tea Party really didn't have anything functional or positive to add to American discourse. They didn't really say any good things about the direction of the country or how government related to citizens. They added nothing of value. And Pete Buttigieg praising them has to mean that he's actually praising the attacks on public services from billionaire elites or the white nationalism of the anti-Obama forces. That's what Pete Buttigieg is essentially saying. If he doesn't mean that, he needs to correct himself, because if you're praising the Tea Party, those are the only two things the Tea Party did. You're praising one or both of those things. And this has to be especially troubling for Pete Buttigieg, not only because he has a sparse record beyond his time in Indiana, but also because he struggles especially with African Americans. He is polling very low with African Americans, and even as he's surging in Iowa, it hasn't necessarily been followed by a generalized surge among African Americans in other parts of the country. And that will be really crucial to him if he actually wants to compete for the nomination. Because both in the general election, but especially in the Democratic primary, African Americans play an immense role, not only with their votes, but with their organizational power, with their donations, and on and on and on, in picking the eventual nominee. It's an unescapable reality. And I think it's important to realize that Buttigieg just does not relate with African Americans. And with this clip, it's only going to hurt him more. Because the Tea Party, again, it was fundamentally about attacking public services and workers and regulations on the one hand, and a reaction to a black president on the other. You can try to split hairs and say people were worried about the size and scope of government, but that is BS. They were mad there was a black president. So at the end of the day, when Pete Buttigieg goes to a Tea Party meeting and says, you're right to have concerns about the direction of our country, what Pete Buttigieg is saying is, you're right to have concerns about the direction of a country that just elected a black man. That's what Pete Buttigieg is saying to this room. At least that's what they're hearing when Pete Buttigieg is speaking. And I can't imagine that defending this movement is going to play well with African Americans and the allies of African Americans in the Democratic Party. It certainly shouldn't. Because let's be really honest, the Tea Party wasn't just a reaction to Obama being elected, the election of a black president, but it was directly connected to what we would see happen over the subsequent years. We have to realize that there's a deep connection between the Tea Party movement on the one hand and the rise of Trump on the other. between the rise of the Tea Party on the one hand and the reemergence of white nationalism on the other, between the rise of the Tea Party on the one hand and Donald Trump's birtherism attacks on Barack Obama. Because don't forget, it was not just a rejection of Obama as a politician. It was not just a movement that said we disagree with President Obama and his vision for America. It was a rejection of him because of his skin tone and who he was, and it would eventually come to question not just his presidency, but his very identity as an American citizen. And this is where Trump sort of gained that new prominence again, where he basically went for years attacking the very citizenship of Barack Obama, implying that Obama was a Kenyan, implying that Obama was hiding his birth certificate, implying that Obama was not eligible to be president. And what happened in 2008 and in 2012 was a historically proportioned case of fraud as a foreigner was elected to the presidential office. And of course, because this person was black, it was seen as this takeover of America by a foreign, stranger, if you will, that tied in so deeply with the Tea Party movement. I don't think Trump's birtherism movement takes off without the Tea Party. And I don't think Trump becomes president without the birtherism movement. So in some ways, the Tea Party, even though it sort of waned in influence by the time Trump became president, it is a part of that generalized trend towards Trump 2016. And Pete Buttigieg here is praising the Tea Party for their general concern about the direction of American society, which is to say that Pete Buttigieg is praising the movement and the directions they were pushing in that led to a Donald Trump presidency. That's what we see here. We know far too little about Pete Buttigieg, but what we do know is this. He will take positions based purely on polling and popularity rather than conviction. At times, he said he supported Medicare for all, and at times he hasn't. At times, he sounded like a progressive, and at times, he sounded like a deep red state Republican, like in this moment. There are times where Pete Buttigieg is seen as a champion for human rights, and then there are other times where Pete Buttigieg adopts very concerning positions about the rights of prisoners and of marginalized people. That all goes to say that Pete Buttigieg stands for one thing above all: what will get him power, prominence, prestige, and wealth. That's what Pete Buttigieg believes in, which is to say, he believes in nothing, so he'll say anything. That's why it's really troubling that at this Tea Party meeting, he basically went and ingratiated himself to a room of racists about why they're right about the direction of the country, which is to say they're mad about a black man being elected. This should be the end of Pete Buttigieg's campaign. There's no way in my mind that he should survive this moment. I've disagreed with the man on his policies and on his general vision for the presidency and the Democratic Party many a time, but those disagreements were sort of within the bounds of, policy differential. None of those should have disqualified him to the extent that here he is embracing the force that delegitimized Barack Obama, or at least tried to. This should be the end of Pete Buttigieg, and my goodness, it's not a moment too soon.